Hello, welcome to Novara Live. I'm Maryam Bastani. It's great to be back. I was on holiday. I didn't see you for a while. I hope you managed to survive. I'm sure you did. Tonight, I'm joined for the very first time by Karl Hansen, Tribune's editor-at-large. Karl, how are we?
Yeah, I'm well. I'm here in Istanbul, actually.
Istanbul. The image is great. He looks very happy and healthy. Maybe we can improve the audio as the night goes on. Let's see. Coming up on tonight's show, what nearly half of Britons get wrong about migration, how a member of the House of Lords, no less, urged ministers to crack down on Palestine Action at the behest of a US military tech firm, and why I think the left should care about the rising tide of violence and vandalism on Britain's trains. If you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Help us build a new media for different politics. And make sure to let us know your comments on the YouTube chat, or you can tweet at us, at me, using the hashtag NovaraLive. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appears to be drawing closer to his endgame for Gaza. Multiple Israeli media sources have reported that Netanyahu has decided to fully reoccupy Gaza, with the country's security cabinet set to meet this week to discuss the option. In a statement, Netanyahu's office said this: "We must continue to stand together and fight together in order to achieve the objectives of the war we have set, all of them: defeating the enemy, releasing our hostages, and ensuring that Gaza will never again threaten Israel. During the week, I will convene the Security Cabinet in order to direct the IDF how to achieve these three objectives, all of them, without exception." But behind the scenes, officials have been more explicit about the plans. One told the Washington Post newspaper this: "Netanyahu has decided to occupy the Gaza Strip, meaning that military operations will also take place in areas where hostages are being held." Another senior official is reported to have said this: "The die has been cast. We're going for the full conquest of the Gaza Strip and defeating Hamas." Until now, the Israeli military is thought to have avoided combat in areas where hostages are being held. The suggestion that the operational restriction will now be dropped may indicate that the prospects of total control of Gaza have trumped the release of hostages as a political priority. In interviews with Israeli media, some previously released hostages have asserted that their captors were instructed to kill them if Israeli soldiers drew close. Einav Zenkawa's son, Matan, remains in captivity in Gaza. Responding to the news of Netanyahu's plans, she said this: "The political party decided to carry out the final solution for Matan Shelley and 49 other kidnapped men and women. 667 days, the hostages are undergoing a holocaust in the tunnels, and instead of reaching a full agreement to end the war in a feasible way, Netanyahu is preparing the operation in turn the living hostages into corpses and disappear the dead. Our children were buried in mass graves, shot in firing squads, selected, and now only the final solution remains. Quote, a political factor is filled with determination to destroy the hostages." A political factor, I suppose, implying that this shift is being led on at a political level, right? We're now seeing Netanyahu impressing the objectives onto the IDF. Some Israeli military leaders are also against Netanyahu's plan, warning that it will put the lives of hostages at risk, increase the country's international isolation, and exhaust Israel's waning military capabilities. One Israeli military analyst said this: "Hostages will die. Large numbers of IDF soldiers will be killed, as well as a serious logistical problem where to house the roughly 1 million civilians who are now in Gaza City. Currently, Israel simply doesn't have legitimacy either to continue to fight in Gaza or to establish a city of refugees on its ruins." The Chief of Staff of Israel's Armed Forces, Ayal Samir, is also said to have voiced strong opposition to the plan, to which a government official told Israeli journalists, quote, "If that doesn't work for the Chief of Staff, he should resign." The Israeli military already occupies around 75% of all land in Gaza. But the new plan, if it comes about, would see troops moving into areas in which nearly 2 million multiply displaced Palestinians have been concentrated. What would that mean for those people, I hear you say? Many of them are lacking in food, water, medical aid, and amongst them hundreds of thousands of children. In all likelihood, it would spell, of course, further disaster. The new plan comes in the context of yet further failed ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas. The sticking point remains, and always has been, that Hamas wants a permanent ceasefire with security guarantees. But a leaked recording of comments made to the families of some Israeli hostages by US envoy Steve Witkoff on Saturday suggests that President Donald Trump may believe the time for negotiations is over.
My president, President Donald Trump, who I can promise you cares as much about your children, the people who are alive and the people who are not alive. He cares as much about your children as he would about any American child that was in there. So I can tell you emphatically that it is his mission statement that everybody comes home. He now believes, leave it too, that everybody ought to come home at once. No peaceful deals. That doesn't work. And we've tried everything, and that's part of it. You're supposed to try anything. You're supposed to use every effort you can. When we got Egon Alexander out, that was victory. We needed to, we saved a life. But now we have to get all 20 out at the same time. And Hamas has shown very, very clearly that they can't keep their word. They just have a problem with keeping their word. The negotiation with them was exhausting. God himself came down here and said to me, you're going to have to exhaust yourself for the next 5 years talking to them, but you'll get everybody down alone. I'd sign up for that, to that effort. Because that's all we care about, is getting people hot. But now we think that we have to shift this negotiation to all or nothing.
Effectively, what Witkoff was saying there was, we've tried everything. We've tried all the other stuff. Now we're going to try something else. Quite ominous. Donald Trump may care as much about the children of Israelis as he does about the children of Americans, but the same certainly can't be said for the children of Palestinians. Last night, British broadcaster ITV aired perhaps the most detailed account of the devastation in Gaza seen so far. It really is extraordinary. After journalist Emma Murphy filmed the enclave from an aid airdrop flight.
Building by building, Gaza is being erased. Cities like broken skeletons laid waste by war. Graveyards of life and lives. The streets, homes and coffee houses of old now cast to the ground. The soul of this place, along with the souls who lived here, brought to ruin in the rubble and dust. Israel bans foreign journalists from entering Gaza. 15,000 feet above is the closest we get to seeing for ourselves the consequences of the war it is waging here. When we joined an airdrop last week, we were told Israel didn't want images from above being filmed or shown. Aid being dropped from this flight is to those who are trying to survive in this hell. This was Gaza before the bombs started falling, a place of life where normal lives were lived. There is no sign of that normality now. This is one of the explosions which destroyed Gaza, targeting the Turkish-Palestine Friendship Hospital, the only specialist cancer hospital in Gaza. This is what's left of it now. This was the Al Wafa Old People's Home. We can't say what's become of its residents. This was a primary and secondary school. We can't say what became of the pupils. Many of the other ruins were homes. We can't say whether those that lived here survived or are among the 60,000 now dead. Under international law, it is a war crime to target schools, hospitals, and other civilian sites. This landscape of destruction looks otherworldly, yet it's not. It is this world, and what is happening may yet come to define one of its darkest eras. One that casts a stain on humanity, which will endure for generations.
That happened in 2023 onwards. Didn't happen a century ago. Didn't happen a millennium ago. And I suspect, actually, when people look at this in contrast to what happened with regards to the Japanese in China, the Italians in East Africa, the concentration of destruction, death, and violence is possibly without precedent, with the exception of the Second World War in Europe. I include Russia there, of course, as well. Utterly extraordinary. It's happening now. It's happening now. You look at the ruins of Gaza, I feel like I'm looking at a Roman city in North Africa. What's that famous one? Timgad, which was destroyed 1,500 years ago. Honestly, Google it. Images of that Roman city destroyed 1,500 years ago. There are more surviving buildings and pillars than some stills from that video. A Roman city which was destroyed, was sacked by Vandals 1,500 years ago, looks in better shape than Gaza, or much of Gaza, in 2025. But don't you dare call it a genocide. Don't you dare call it ethnic cleansing. Don't you dare talk about war crimes. This is not normal. That kind of imagery you've just seen there, in the post-Cold War era, is not normal. Not normal. Iraq invasion didn't look like that. Loads of bad stuff happened. Fallujah was awful. It didn't look like that. Afghanistan didn't look like that. If you want to see that level and that concentration of destruction being inflicted on civilian populations, you have to go to the Korean War. You have to go to Vietnam. Nothing like that, certainly in my lifetime. Nothing. Nothing. Ruins. It looks like you're looking at an ancient civilization. Hasn't been there for 1,000 years. No, they were playing football and drinking coffee and starting families and going to funerals and buying books and making breakfast 3 years ago in those places. And they looked very normal. Now, that wasn't Emma Murphy's first time flying over Gaza.
What I found very striking was that I did a similar flight to this with the RAF in March last year and was able to look out of the window down onto Gaza. And there was obviously an awful lot of devastation then. And it was notable how much damage had been done. And I came away thinking, what desperate scenes we'd witnessed from above. When we took the flight this time, 17 months on, it was incredible, the difference. The amount of damage that has been done in those months since is phenomenal. That whole area we went across was pretty much flattened. And it's not really surprising when you think that Gaza is 25 miles long and about 12 miles deep, 140 square miles, really. Onto that area has been dropped around 100,000 tons of explosives. That's more than was used in Dresden, Hamburg, and London put together in the Second World War over a much larger area. So that is why, with such concentrated hits, the damage has been so significant. And I think that Israel knows it has questions that it will have to answer at some point about this. And as Prime Minister Netanyahu is suggesting that he is going to expand this war, it's very hard to see what else he can do to really damage the infrastructure and the land. But without question, further expansion will do great damage to the people.
There's people in the media saying that Israel's being restrained. There are people seriously in this country's media. Israel is being restrained. We're talking about a strip of land, 25 miles by 12 miles, more or less. Tiny strip of land, tiny. I mean, incomprehensibly small, really. Much smaller than Greater London, much smaller. Tiny strip of land. And it's received more munitions in terms of bombs falling on it, as you heard there, than London, Dresden, and Hamburg combined. You might have seen that first video and thought, wow, that looks like Dresden. It's way worse. Way worse. Way worse. And remember, that was over a 6-year war in terms of the bombing of Dresden, really from 1941 to 45, so 4 years. This is over a shorter period of time as well. Karl, the video footage we just saw, I mean, you look at that first video in particular, you think this must be the death knell for credibility for Israel in the eyes of publics across the Western world. Am I wrong? I mean, that seems almost, impossible to defend, but perhaps you disagree.
I agree. Seeing that report from ITV and saying, we have Keir Starmer and David Lammy increasing the rhetoric and condemnation, want to do a sort of symbolic recognition of a Palestinian state. for me, I have this grim feeling that they're all getting their alibis in line. They know what the reoccupation of Gaza that Netanyahu is threatening means. And it means that the genocide is entering its final phases. And I think every one of those politicians and members of the media knows that in future years they're going to be asked what they did during the genocide. And I think now at these final stages, they're trying to get the story straight to say that at least they provided some opposition at the end, because public opinion has totally turned against Israel and there is no more defending it.
I think that's entirely right. And I'll also say this. This is a dream for people like the Islamic Republic of Iran, right? There has been a massive consolidation around the government in Iran because now they can say, right, well, you want to get rid of us, we'll become a failed state. Look at Gaza. Look at Syria. They got rid of Bashar Assad. The next thing you know, the base of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Syrian military, is bombed by Israel. That will happen to us. Israel is purely a force for chaos and death and destruction and violence in West Asia. It just is. And I think you're right. They're lining up their arguments now, aren't they? But it's not going to be enough. There are lots of wild polls out at the moment. Reform are heading for a supermajority. Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana's new party is equal on vote share with Labour. The Tories could be reduced to less than 30 seats. Here's hoping. But I have to be honest, this new polling data is up there with the very best of them. It's from YouGov and asks respondents whether the majority of immigrants to the UK are legal or illegal. Remarkably, 47% of people think illegal migration is higher than legal migration. That's almost half the country. When you include about the same, it's more than half. It's 55%, in fact. Now, that is obviously completely wrong, but let's go through the details. The data kind of matters. Turns out the media doesn't do that enough. In total, the Home Office recorded approximately 174,000 to 176,000 crossing by small boats between 2018 and July this year. So over the last 7 years, fewer than 200,000 people came via small boats. You might think that should be zero. That's fine. Bear with me. Also, it's important to remember undocumented migration also includes visa overstays. We talk about that a lot less because it's a lot less sexy and you get a lot less B-roll for your news operators. Meanwhile, for just the year 2023 alone, an estimated 1.2 million people legally migrated to the UK long term, with net migration over that period standing at 685,000. That's how many more people arrived than left. From 2018 to 2025, illegal long-term migration to the UK was around 7 million. So why do so many people, the majority in fact, think legal and undocumented migration are either the same or actually that the latter is higher? After all, they couldn't be more wrong. Where does that idea come from? Well, I suspect it's because that misunderstanding was key to the communication strategy of the last Tory government. The Treasury was saying we need lots of legal economic migration, especially post-COVID. We haven't got a growth model, so let's have more migration. That's all they care about. Line goes up. But there was one problem. The government's voters wanted the precise opposite. Again, you might disagree with them, but it's very hard to find a Tory voter in 2019 saying they wanted migration to rise. That's when the Tories had an idea. They said to themselves, I know, while overseeing record levels of legal migration, which happened under the likes of Priti Patel and Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, though you would never know that if you heard the words exiting their mouths, we'll psyop the public. We'll talk about illegal migration so much and in such a way that they think numerically those people are far higher than the ones we are allowing to migrate to the UK. Emphasis on we. 7 million legally over the same period by small boats, 180,000. Karl, I mean, that statistic, almost half of people in the UK think illegal migration is higher than illegal migration. That's just crazy by itself. Do you think that's the result of an intentional strategy by the Conservative Party?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny to think about how in the run-up to the Brexit referendum, that one of the main issues was that David Cameron had promised to get immigration under 100,000. Obviously net immigration under 100,000, and it was at 330,000 or something at the time. And that was the point of attack from UKIP and from the Leave campaign. And then when they won and the Conservatives were in power, immigration continued to go up because of the simple fact that big business loves immigration. It helps to keep wages low when combined with weak labour laws and weak trade unions. And so the focus shifted then onto illegal immigration. I'm sure you can think back 5 years ago. Small boat crossings were not really much of a political issue. Now the BBC itself has effectively a small boats crossing correspondent who goes to the beaches in Kent or out on a dinghy to film every other arrival. So it's certainly an attempt to distract people from the necessity of legal immigration, which big business and the Conservatives love, and direct that focus onto asylum seekers instead. And it's resulted in a totally skewed, misinformed public.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the level of debate about migration in this country is just, it's on the floor. And I say this all the time, and some people on the right who have very different views, actually they meet you on that level, right? They say, you know what? British people in this country for 50 years have had a fertility rate below 2.1. You're going to need some migration, particularly in certain industries, certain sectors of the labour market. You're going to need some. Okay? We see that right now in the NHS, right? We don't produce enough doctors and nurses. You're going to need some. I don't think we should, by the way. We should be training all those people here at home. You might want a world-class consultant from elsewhere, but you get my point. And they meet you at that level, right? They say, you know what? Yes, we should be trying to address labour shortages domestically and so on, and maybe help families, maybe incentivize having kids rather than completely disincentivizing it. You might agree or disagree on this or that point, but you can have a thoughtful conversation about policy, right? But those guys aren't the norm. Those guys aren't the norm. Because as Karl said, you've got a Conservative Party with people like David Cameron, apparently a moderate, saying that we need to have migration below 100,000 and the tens of thousands in 2010. Between 2018 and 2025, let's say 2024, that was 6 million. 6 million people legally coming to the UK. So they're lying. The Tory party are lying to their own voters. They're lying to the public, barely scrutinised by the media. Who gets the blame for it? Who gets the blame for it? Migrants. Migrants get the left. Jeremy Corbyn, me. I've seen people say, well, this is you got what you want. What, is Ash Sarkar signing the visas? Give me a break. And it's exactly for the reasons that Karl was talking about. Big business loves migration. Doesn't mean you're anti-immigration, all of a sudden, but it just does. That's just a fact. In this country, we've had zero productivity growth basically for the best part of 20 years. And all the growth we've seen really has come from adding people. And I think a good socialist position is that really, if you're having any growth at all, it should be, and we can have a conversation about growth, but it should be from productivity growth, right? Because the more productivity growth you have, the more leisure time we can have, the longer your holidays can be, the shorter the working week. That's how we should be thinking. But instead, we've had zero productivity growth. And the Treasury's mindset is, well, we need to pay for frankly, the Ponzi scheme, which is public pensions. So we need to have very high levels of legal migration. But the Tory voters don't want that. So the Tory party has to lie to those voters, has to mislead them, has to psyop them. Now people are realizing that and they're getting very angry, and they're taking their anger out, like I say, at the migrants, at the refugees, at the left, at Ash Sarkar, at me, at Novara Media. If you want to help us build a media which is actually based in reality, talks about the facts, and even sometimes engages with competing points of view, heaven forbid, you know what to do. Go to novaramedia.com/support. Help us build a new media for different politics. We're doing media differently here. And we want to bring that number down, right? I've just shown you a statistic which talks about basically 50% of the electorate is completely wrong about the nature of migration in this country. Like, that's not up for debate. They are completely wrong. We need to improve the quality of information in this country's media. Help us get there. Go to novaramedia.com/support. In July, we had 55 million views on our Instagram account. So if you do support our work, that's what you're helping. We have an extraordinary reach thanks to people just like you. There's an interesting story in the Times today that seems to show how desperate the government are to control the narrative over migration, even if it means denying some widely held opinions. Donna Jones, the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, says that a minister rang her in the wake of last summer's anti-migrant riots to pressure her over comments she made linking the disorder to migration. In her statement last year, Jones said that, quote, "a mass uncontrolled immigration was one factor behind the violent disorder." The newly appointed Labour minister, who she hasn't named, then allegedly told her, quote, "You and I both know this has nothing to do with immigration," and asked her to take it down. Her statement was also criticised by the chief Crown prosecutor, who described it as, quote, "totally unacceptable," and said she was, quote, "appearing to justify rioting and criminality that police officers are bravely having to deal with right now." Jones told the Times this: "After I put my statement out on the same day," of course this is last year, "a Labour government minister called me and asked me to retract my statement, saying it was misleading the public and causing community tensions. I told them that they were wrong and it was absolutely why people were protesting. Those are not scenes we ever want to see again. These protests will continue to happen unless the government takes serious and tangible action to stop the flow of immigration to the UK." We just had a story I was talking about a moment ago about between 2018 and 2015, 7 million people come to the UK legally. But now we've had Labour in for 12 months. Donna Jones is effectively an apologist for people engaging in criminal disorder, right? You were in charge, or your party was in charge, for almost all of that. Would you have been encouraging those people then, right? July the 3rd, this cannot happen. This wanton vandalism and violence. Flick a switch. July the 4th, Labour government. How dare you criticise and condemn these good, law-abiding people who've been pushed to this? Anyway, here's what she said next. With more protests planned for August and no sign of an imminent solution from the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister, I fear parts of the country risk falling into a state of lawlessness. Very possibly, and it's been set a long time in the making. People continue to be concerned about the number of people arriving on our shores daily and the impact this is having on local services. Community stability is a valid concern, and those who are not concerned are rightly anxious about the unrest on their streets. This won't stop until people's fears are addressed. Again, she's talking about small boats. In the last 7 years, less than 180,000 people have come by small boats, 7 million people legally. So you're talking about stretching public services. Again, it's quite obvious. It's quite obvious which one you would, although of course many of the people coming legally are literally keeping public services alive. But if you talk about that, then all of a sudden you're on quite weak ground, aren't you? And remember, she's a politician. Now, it's worth pointing out that Jones is currently running for, you guessed it, public office. She is the Conservative candidate for the upcoming Mayor of Hampshire and Isle of Wight elections. That'll be next May. And of course, Reform are looking to do very well there. So this shouldn't really surprise us. Karl, this is really interesting, right? Because you've got basically somebody who's been a former Tory party candidate, run for Westminster elections, Police and Crime Commissioner, looking to be a mayoral candidate, probably, I think will probably come second in that part of the world. But in any case, a proper part of the Conservative Party machine, and now she's saying stuff that you wouldn't really associate with Conservative Party candidates.
Well, I mean, maybe you wouldn't have a few years ago, but the growth of Reform to the right of the Conservatives has radicalised the Conservative Party. You know, it's unimaginable that Kemi Badenoch would have been a Conservative leader only 3 or 4 years ago. And as Reform grows and continues to eat into the Tory vote and threatens even to replace them as a party, I think the Conservatives increasingly feel that they have no option but to pivot even harder into the populist hard right, which means, inflammatory statements about immigrants, asylum seekers, all other types of groups, and having sort of overt sympathies with the sort of far-right thugs and gangs that we're increasingly seeing at protests on our streets. And I think unfortunately this is likely going to be the new shape of the Conservative Party going forward. They're not going to go back to the kind of vaguely liberal, sort of conservative era of David Cameron and George Osborne, they're going to more and more imitate Nigel Farage and groups and individuals to the right of them as the issues that they've encouraged. With this kind of open Pandora's box, haven't they? They've turned up the temperature on all of these divisive issues, encouraged the base and the media around them to go wild and further radicalise the voters, and then found that those voters move into a different party, and so they're having to chase them. And I think that's the new shape of the Conservative Party.
I think that's right. I mean, UKIP for a long time were basically they were a pressure group, right? I mean, they barely won any councillors, even, forget MPs. They had a couple of good years, but they were basically a pressure group, very effective pressure group. Obviously, they won a ton of MEPs. Pressure group on the Tory party with regards to the EU. Reform aren't a pressure group on the Tory party. Reform are completely transforming the political terrain, and the Tory party has to walk into it, or they have to be irrelevant, right? If you're a Tory now, you have two options. Reform or Lib Dems, right? They're swallowing that coalition between them. Where do you go? If you're a moderate pro-business Tory, you know, you like going to Pride, you like your DEI and your corporate social responsibility, you'll probably go to the Lib Dems, won't you? Jeremy Hunt. And then the rest of them, sort of more wacky elements, will go towards Reform. That's not to denigrate Reform, by the way. I'm talking about something like Kemi Badenoch, who I do just generally consider to be quite wacky. Or Liz Truss, actually. I mean, Nigel Farage is a far more credible political operator than either of those two people, right? Far more credible. Let's go to our next story in a moment. Let me know what you think, though. I'm still waiting for some super chats. I'm still waiting for some comments. Use the hashtag Novara Live. We always like to hear what you got to say. The thing I was saying earlier as well about nurses and how we should be training them here at home, isn't it crazy? In this country, the average nursing student is graduating with £55,000 worth of debt. £55,000 worth of debt. And I think the NHS in England alone is about 40,000 nurses short. There might be a relationship between those two things. Now, I would like to get rid of all student debt. I'd like to scrap existing student debt. I'd like to, abolish fees. But I'm also quite a pragmatic person. Whisper it. Start with nurses. Scrap fees for nurses. The idea that somebody will go into actually, as it turns out, a not particularly well-paid profession anyway, has to do so with £55,000 worth of debt when we really need them as a society. I mean, that to me is the single most insane fact about Britain in 2025. That's the answer to the question, right? Is Britain a successful society? No. Nurses graduate with £55,000 worth of debt just to have a job, just to be exploited in the NHS and be underpaid and overworked. Crazy. That's the one stat. Sums it all up. Case closed. A domestic direct action protest group, Palestine Action, was prescribed as a terrorist organisation by Home Secretary Yvette Cooper last month. Since then, over 200 protesters, many of them elderly, have been arrested by police under counter-terror law after illegally holding signs in public reading, and I quote, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." Others have also been arrested for holding signs or wearing pro-Palestinian clothes that are perfectly legal. But following a High Court judge granting a judicial review of the Home Secretary's decision to prescribe the group, a hearing will now take place in November that could see the ban overturned. Before then, though, protest group Defend Our Juries has organised a mass demonstration of civil disobedience. As several hundred people may risk arrest on Saturday to protest the prescription of Palestine Action, potentially testing the Metropolitan Police Force's capacity to detain them all. And The Guardian has reported that prison bosses are clearing space for arrested demonstrators amid concerns that some jails are close to capacity, though that's the result of anti-migrant protests as well. Appearing on Sky News today, Yvette Cooper, a Home Secretary, was asked about the mass action.
Is the government happy to see hundreds of people out this weekend in support of Palestine Action being arrested?
Well, the prescribing process is based on detailed security assessments and security advice to me as Home Secretary, and I have to take that immensely seriously. It's based on violent action and injuries that this group has taken, including on national security targets, but also injuries to people, and also some disturbing information referring to future planning as well. So that's the information that I have to take immensely seriously when making those prescribing decisions. I do understand there will be people who do not know, who are wanting to protest, who do not know what the nature of this group is. Let's be clear, this is not about Palestine or protesting about Palestine. This is about a particular narrow, specific group that has both a violent record and information and about future planning as well. More of that information is likely to be revealed once court cases come through and can't be in advance. But I would say to people, this is not a non-violent organisation.
Now, Yvette Cooper hasn't provided any evidence to back up those claims. She hasn't shared that disturbing information relating to supposed Palestine Action plans, nor has she clarified what she means by the true nature of this group. It's unclear language that's designed on purpose to be vaguely sinister, and we're just supposed to believe her. But if Yvette Cooper is really interested in something potentially sinister, she may want to look closer to home. This is a report from The Guardian today. Lord Richard Dannett, a life peer in the House of Lords and former head of the British Army no less, urged ministers to crack down on Palestine Action at, wait for it, the request of US defence firm Teledyne. And a police officer was so concerned by what he saw as Dannett's attempt to have, quote, input into a police investigation into an attack on a Teledyne factory that he reported it to his superior officer. In 2022, Palestine Action activists caused damage to a Teledyne factory in Wales. That's when the investigating officer, Sergeant Alex Stewart, encountered Dannett, who has been a paid advisor to the firm since 2022, despite being a British lawmaker with enviable access to ministers and MPs, although maybe that's the point. The Guardian reports this. Stewart had spoken with the general manager of the factory in the UK. She had told him that a senior Teledyne executive based in the US had, quote, spoken to Lord Richard Dannett about Palestine Action. Stewart, this is the police officer, wrote, quote, Lord Dannett was chief of the Army General Staff. He's now a life peer. He has an invested interest in the aspect of UK trade and investment, particularly military projects. Essentially, there has been an indication that he wants this case to be explained and he wants to have some input on it. They haven't explained exactly what he wants. However, I have told them that it would not be wise to have a member of the House of Lords poking around in a live criminal case. Isn't it insane then that that has to be pointed out to somebody who was the head of the army? It would not be wise to have a member of the House of Lords poking around in a live criminal case. No shit. He added, I have explained that they need to establish what Lord Dannett wants. He wrote that if the peer was concerned in general about Palestine Action's tactics, he should talk to senior police officers at a national level. It's not best placed for him to actively speak with an investigation team about the matter in the way that I think he wants to. Later that day, a DCI replied to Stewart, quote, the Chief Constable is aware of the case and has received an update, whilst Lord Dannett has every right to communicate with the force regarding matters of concern. It does not mean that the matters he raises receive the response that he may want. I mean, I just don't believe, I don't agree with that. He doesn't know, he doesn't actually. Lord Dannett, if he's paid by a business, does not have a right to contact police officers in matters regarding that business. My opinion, actually. Now, during a 2023 criminal court case in which one of the activists involved in the attack was prosecuted, the judge ruled that Lord Dannett was not relevant to the trial and said that the peer had not tried to interfere in the case. The judge did, however, allow Sergeant Stewart's evidence to be heard, though he ruled that Dannett should not be named. But if he's not so significant or relevant, why not? He did nothing wrong after all. Now, Dannett told The Guardian that the sergeant's allegations were, quote, unfounded, and he also pointed to the judge's view that he had, quote, nothing to do with the trial. But The Guardian has more detail on the ways Dannett is alleged to have acted on behalf of Teledyne over Palestine Action. According to the Campaign Against Arms Trade, Teledyne UK has been granted several arms export licenses to Israel since the country's assault on Gaza began. And in December 2022, Dannett had a call with the manager of the Welsh factory and a senior member of Teledyne. The Guardian reports this. Dannett told The Guardian that Teledyne had contacted me to seek my assistance in raising concerns by the company to the government with regards to attacks on their premises. He added, they briefed me on the Palestine Action attacks, and I then agreed to write to the Home Secretary. Dannett then wrote the promised letter to the Home Secretary, who at that time was Suella Braverman, using a paper headed with, quote, General Lord Dannett, GCB, CBE, MC, DL, and addressed from the House of Lords. Dannett said that, quote, the threat from Palestine Action has more widespread implications for security and the economy within the United Kingdom. The peer also wrote this. The slow pace at which the British legal system has been working to take action against those involved in the trespass and criminal action resulting from such, quote, direct action has served to embolden Palestine Action and their continued recruitment drive for individuals who are prepared to commit arrestable offences. Now, in that letter, Dannett disclosed that he was a paid advisor to Now, in that letter, Dannett disclosed that he was a paid advisor to Teledyne. But he also told Braverman that he would be, quote, very grateful to receive assurance that the threat from Palestine Action is fully recognised by our security services and appropriate action either planned or being taken. And he added that he had, quote, undertaken to brief the Teledyne main board in the US that the threat from Palestine Action in the UK is being suitably addressed. I mean, this is crazy. This is crazy. He's paid by the company. He thinks he can do this? Wild. I mean, this is the stuff we know about, right? You know, somebody that's so comfortable with this kind of carry on makes you wonder, how often have they done it? In 2024, Dannett wrote another letter, this time to Labour Home Office Minister Dan Jarvis. This is also from The Guardian. Dannett once again disclosed his role. Under the same letterhead, he said he would be, quote, very grateful to receive assurance from the current government that the threat posed by Palestine Action continues to be fully recognised by our security services and that appropriate action is being taken. This is wild. How can you take a salary from a US firm and then you're making representations, one presumes on their behalf, they're paying you, to surveil and potentially undermine the civil liberties of people in this country? I don't think this is what legislators are meant to do. I could be wrong. Clearly, Lord Dannett disagrees. And now, this isn't Dannett's first time being accused of using his unelected position as a lawmaker to lobby for overseas firms. In March, The Guardian reported that Dannett had told undercover reporters he could arrange meetings with ministers for a potential client, despite a House of Lords ban on lobbying. There was this video evidence too.
Well, again, the first thing I would need to do is to find out who the minister in the House of Lords was who was responsible. If it was ideally someone I knew, I could have an opening conversation. If it was someone that I didn't know, I'd make a point of getting to know them and then having that conversation.
He clearly thinks this is normal and acceptable, which begs the question, how often has he done it, like I said? In response to the report, Dannett disagreed that he'd broken the House of Lords Code of Conduct. He is now, however, unsurprisingly, under investigation over 2 sets of allegations around lobbying. But, unsurprisingly, Dannett's record goes much further back, all the way to 2012, when the Sunday Times caught him out in a different undercover investigation into former military chiefs. The piece on Dannett begins, amazingly, like this. Lord Dannett knew there was no better place to impress the 2 executives seeking his services in his weekday apartment in an exclusive gated residence that no amount of money could buy. The front door of his private lodging in the Tower of London is guarded by a beefeater, and as the former head of the army was quick to point out, its former occupants included Thomas More, Guy Fawkes, and Anne Boleyn. "Is this all yours?" inquired one of the visitors as she was ushered into his drawing room overlooking the Thames. "It's the Queen's, really, without getting too picky about it," Dannett replied. What's going on? The undercover reporters posed as 2 executives looking to sell weapons to the British Armed Forces. The Sunday Times subsequently reported this. The executives had called on Dannett, who holds the ceremonial position of Constable of the Tower, to discuss hiring him to lobby for a South Korean company that wanted to sell a cutting-edge drone to the British Armed Forces. The former army chief would be given a role on the company's advisory board, but the executives made no bones about it. What they really wanted were his contacts. The fee on the table was £100,000 a year for 2 days' work a month, which Dannett described as, quote, reasonable. It quickly became clear that Dannett, a former advisor to David Cameron, was no stranger to this kind of backdoor lobbying. He told the reporters he was preparing to circumvent government procurement rules by engineering a dinner meeting with the top civil servant at the Ministry of Defence, MOD, so that he could lobby for a £400 million contract. Surprise, surprise, he's besties with David Cameron. According to that Sunday Times article, Dannett retired from the military, the lump sum of up to £260,000, and has an annual pension of about £90,000 a year from a pension pot of £1.7 million. And remember, of course, he's a lord. He's paid to go to the Lords when he bothers to turn up, as well as his lobbying gigs. At the time, Lord Dannett denied he had any interest in breaching the House of Lords rules and said any suggestion to the contrary would be defamatory. I bet he said that. Crazy, right? What a crazy story. What a ridiculous story. What do you think? And by the way, look, we're psyoped by the media into thinking that people like Lord Dannett are the best of the best. The head of the British Army, in the House of Lords. We have the most meritocratic, competent system on God's green earth. It couldn't be any different. Maybe we're wasting a ton of money on really useless people leading to really stupid outcomes. Just a thought. Karl, what's your view on the House of Lords? Should we get rid of it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's kind of like facilitates massive corruption and lobbying. Many of these lords never participate in debates, never vote or very rarely vote, and essentially just use the peerages as a way to solicit corruption. But I think the thing that I love about Lord Dannett is that he seems to have got himself into hot water because he's been particularly oafish about the way that he's got around this. Plenty of other politicians take money from arms companies or foreign states and do lobbying on their behalf. Like he was daft enough to get involved in a particular legal case and sort of get his hands dirty. But when you look at the prescription of Palestine Action, the person who did the legwork for all of that was John Woodcock, Lord Walney, who was the government's anti-extremism advisor. And he's funded by both the Israel lobby and the arms lobby. Yvette Cooper, who pushed for the prescription of Palestine Action, it came from the Home Office. Elbit Systems, the Israeli arms lobbyist, largely targeted by Palestine Action, had meetings and emails with the Home Office urging for the retrial of Palestine Action activists. And they coordinated between the government and the arms lobbyist. And of course, Lord Dannett is a fool for going about it in such an uncouth and obvious way. But he probably feels a little bit hard done by simply because he wasn't refined enough in the way that he went about it. If he did this a little bit smarter, then he could be Home Secretary or he could be the government's anti-extremism advisor and making the same money on behalf of the same clients and avoided any of the trouble that he's now found himself in. But yeah, of course, it goes deeper than just this one issue. Like corporate lobbying corrupts the entirety of British politics and distorts policy in the interests in favour of those special interests. And the House of Lords in particular is notorious for it.
Yeah. The single best anti-corruption thing we can do, anti-corruption drive, first policy, scrap the House of Lords. Right? You save a ton of money. You'd probably make it much easier to pass legislation. Well, you would. And by the way, Norway has one chamber, not two. Seems to work okay as a country. They seem to be doing okay in Norway. And you cut out a bunch of corruption. The point is, these corrupt, powerful people have a lot of influence in the media. That's why talking about getting rid of the House of Lords is not on the table. Which, by the way, in terms of a centrist uni-party blob, it's the House of Lords. It's the House of Lords. It's the unelected House of Lords. I would go as far as to say that the laws before 97, when it was literally lords, when it was literally hereditary lords, was better than this. Pure Blair to get something that was really screwed up and antiquated and to replace it with something which is somehow worse and more corrupt. Pure liquid Tony Blair. Let's go to your comments quickly. I want to read this out, actually. There's a comment here about Scotland, as the president would say. Aaron and Novara in general. Why don't you discuss reform UK and Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales? The situation is completely different. Out with your little England bubble, Novara in general. That's just not true. But where's not true? Reform are polling first or second in Wales. Generally second. There's one poll that has them first. Reform. They're polling second in Scotland, mate. I'm sorry. The argument of like, Wales and Scotland have a completely different political geography to England is less true now than it was 5 years ago. Reform are ahead of Labour in Scotland and Wales. In basically all the polls I've seen from the last 2 months. So I think that's a bit of cope. Don't mean to be mean, it's a bit of cope. Yes, Reform is doing extraordinarily well in England. It's primarily an English party. But it's doing really shocking. That actually to me is the big shock. If Reform came first in elections to the Senate next year, they won't come first in Scotland, of course they won't, but they can come a very healthy second in Holyrood. But they could win the Senate. So I'm afraid I just don't agree. It's not a little England bubble. You look at any data over the last couple of months, and actually Reform is doing surprisingly well in Scotland and Wales. Earlier this year, the TSSA, the Transport Salaried Staffs Association, which is one of Britain's transport unions, launched a report detailing a rising tide of violence on Britain's rail network. The union launched that report in February, that was in Parliament, and the top lines from it were nothing short of extraordinary. Over half of respondents reported experiencing some form of violence, either physical or verbal, within the previous year. 95% of respondents reported that they had been on the receiving end of verbal threats or abuse. So basically all of them. 40% of respondents reported incidents involving weapons. 40% of respondents also reported incidents resulting in minor injuries, such as cuts, bruises, or sprains. Racial harassment was reported by 43% of respondents, while 37% reported sexual harassment. This is all at work over the previous 12 months. Not since I've been working on the rail, not since I've been a member of the TSSA, over the previous 12 months. Basically everybody had experienced verbal or physical violence of some kind. 40% had encountered somebody with a weapon. Wild. That should be the number one story on the BBC website. Yesterday, the TSSA shared these photos on X detailing the kind of damage happening on Britain's trains. The images you are seeing are of a carriage on the Southern network. This is one carriage in particular. Basically, every pane of glass has been broken throughout the carriage by what looks like a BB gun. To find out how bad things are really getting on Britain's trains, I spoke earlier to the General Secretary of the TSSA, Maryam Eslamdoust.
Unfortunately, we're seeing a wide range of violent and abusive behaviours. Transport workers are being spat at, threatened, punched, kicked, and in most extreme cases killed. We've had members like Belly Mujinga, a GTR employee, one of our members who was spat at by a passenger who was infected with COVID, and she soon died of COVID-related complications. In December last year, George Ortega died after being assaulted. He died of head injuries. He was assaulted at Ilford Station. So this is happening far too often, and it's becoming normalised. Our members deserve safety at work, not fear at work.
That's incredible. Somebody died last year. I mean, COVID, you can say that it was, that's a unique context. Obviously, it's appalling. But somebody died of head injuries last year. What happened there, George Ortega?
George was attacked by a passenger, and he was hit on the head, and he later died in hospital from the injury.
So have things gotten worse? And what kinds of problems are we seeing more of? Or is this just the baseline with regards to the railways? And we're talking about it more because of social media or because you've run a good campaign?
Some things have definitely got worse since COVID. But there is so much underreporting that it may have existed before COVID. What we are being told is that the violence, it runs across demographics, so it's teenagers and professionals engaging in this type of violence. The TSSA treasurer, Mary Sitley, is a frontline worker, and she was threatened by a middle-class, middle-aged, professional-looking man. So it runs across demographics. We have looked into what factors are causing this. And it's definitely cuts to mental health services and youth provision over the years have created that instability and exposed, these people are being exposed to transport workers. The cost of living crisis means a lot more people can't afford transport fares, and when challenged, they're lashing out. But we can't ignore the big elephant in the room. Public transport has been understaffed and dehumanised. Lone working practices and unstaffed stations remove the very safety net that used to prevent escalation. So it's a perfect storm of economic pressures, public service collapse, and corporate cost cutting.
And do you see repeat offenders? I mean, you said this is a wide range of people that are doing this kind of stuff, that are making threats, intimidating members of staff, or even engaging in acts of violence and vandalism. But is it a very small portion of people using trains that are doing this repeatedly? Or is it often people just doing it as a one-off because they've lost their temper?
It's a combination of both. There's repeated offenders and there's one-off incidents. We unfortunately, we don't have the stats to support it because employers aren't sharing post-incident reports with us.
And your union is campaigning to increase funding to BTP, that's the British Transport Police. Can you explain the perspective behind that and what precisely you want? What needs to change with regards to BTP for your union to be happy?
So the British Transport Police is currently facing an £8.5 million budget shortfall. We're the TSSA is the recognised union for BTP staff. We know exactly what this means. Around 300 jobs are at risk, including frontline and essential back office roles. Station offices are being closed, leaving large areas with little or no police presence. This affects BTP's ability to respond to incidents in a timely manner, and this will only make things worse. So we need more BTP officers on the network, not fewer. But actually, TSSA is campaigning on a comprehensive strategy to eliminate violence against transport workers. So we're asking to end lone working practices. This is especially for onboard and bus drivers, because when you're working alone, that's when you're most exposed to danger. We're asking employers and train operating companies to properly resource stations and maintain ticket offices. Just the mere ticket office presence is a deterrent. We're asking the government to fund British Transport Police adequately, and that's the campaign that I just spoke about. We are asking employers to take their duty of care seriously towards transport workers. Often they pressure workers to return to work before they're ready. And finally, we're asking the government to make violence against transport workers a specific aggravated offence, like it's being done for retail workers.
I mean, let me just get this straight. That's, again, really incredible. You just said that there are proposed cuts to British Transport Police, which could mean as many as 300 jobs go. That's while we had this report, as I mentioned before I spoke to you. You've got 40% of your own members of staff, according to the data that you collected, saying that they'd experienced somebody brandishing a weapon in the previous 12 months. You're seeing members of staff die at work, like George Ortega. Even after all of that, there are proposals to cut British Transport Police.
Absolutely. So There is a £8.5 million shortfall and a recruitment freeze in place. This is affecting BTP's ability to respond quickly to incidents, and it's already stretched, and this will make things even worse.
That was Maryam Eslamdoust, General Secretary for the TSSA Union. I mean, I was just thinking about this actually with a colleague earlier. These guys are in a really unique position of being public service workers. I mean, Southern is now actually publicly owned. It's been renationalised by the Labour Party, the Labour government. But they're involved in a financial transaction. I mean, I think it puts them in a very uniquely vulnerable place. The idea, a guy died? I mean, to my shame, I didn't know that. This is literally my job. A guy died. People are dying, trying to keep the rail ticking over in this country. Carriages are being smashed to bits. This is not a national story. I want to know why. Why isn't this a national story? The TSSA shared it yesterday. I shared it yesterday. It's got 1,000 likes. I haven't had a single journalist DM me, say, hey, how do I get the rights to these pictures? Why isn't that a national story? Because it's not, can't blame foreigners. That's why. Karl, your views on this rising problem of vandalism and disorder on our trains?
Yeah, I think Maryam described it quite well. There are cuts to public transport, which mean that stations are kind of just unstaffed, increasingly like wild places. But I think with the transport sector, like almost every other public service, anybody who's the face of them that interacts with the public is dealing with the issues that deep cuts to public services and poverty are causing. You have staff in A&E talking about facing increasing violence and abuse. Teachers in schools suffer the same type of thing. And railway workers, transport workers in general, are no exception to this. I think when you cut and you cut and you cut, society begins to disintegrate. Problems that could be avoided or stopped earlier end up building, and it's public workers, not just in the public sector, also in the private sector, who are interacting with the public, who unfortunately are bearing the brunt of the sort of increasing division and anger and mental health problems and so on that are occurring in society. And there's no simple solution to it. It means reversing the entire economic model that is creating that type of disturbance and putting workers on the front line having to deal with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's some interesting comments. One from Kate42 with a £4.99 super chat. Thank you, Kate42. Disabled people also rely on transport workers. Yep. Guard on the train, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why it's an important campaign. Also, one other comment about we shouldn't be asking for more cops, British Transport Police on the train. We should have more staff. This isn't, the TSA aren't asking for more British Transport Police. They don't want them to be cut. They don't want to be cut. You've got almost 100% of your members in a trade union experiencing verbal or physical violence in the previous 12 months. You don't want the BTP to be cut. That's not a right-wing position. I don't think. Right? You've had somebody die from head injuries at Ilford train station. You don't want the BTP cut. Doesn't mean, by the way, infinity British Transport Police is going to solve them, because it won't. I agree with you. The first step is more staff, at ticket offices, not having single members of staff do these patrols by themselves, etc. But you absolutely should not be cutting BTP. First thing, don't cut it. You probably do want to put it back up to the level it was in 2010. Sorry. But if 40% of TSSA members are doing their job and they're encountering people with literal weapons, I just think it's really remiss to say we shouldn't care. Look, there's nothing to do with the BTP. Of course it is. Come on. I don't think the long-term solution is, we have quadruple the BTP and it all disappears. I agree with you. It's primarily a social problem. But you've got to guarantee the safety and welfare of these workers. They're literally putting their lives and well-being at risk. We'll talk about that another time. Karl, thanks for joining me tonight.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All the way from Istanbul. I thought it was pretty good, particularly for his first time. Hope to get him back on again soon. And thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.